This is Pet Life Radio. Let's talk pets.
Welcome to Aquariumania. I'm your host, Dr. Roy Anong, speaking to you from the University of Florida's Tropical Aquaculture Laboratory. Thanks for joining us. Sustainability and conservation of the Earth's aquatic resources are critical to our planet's health. In the aquarium hobby, there's constant debate over the pros and cons of wild collection versus aquaculture. Aquarium trade leaders understand that both, when properly managed, can be sustainable and promote conservation, and that industry and public education are key. My guests today are Alan, Luken and Shelby Stensrud, Associate Brand Managers at Segrest Farms based in Florida. Join us as Alan and Shelby discuss conservation and sustainability in the aquarium industry. We'll be right back after these messages.
Does your dog itch, scratch, stink, or shed like crazy? Come to Dynovite for help.
Order a 90-day supply of Dynovite.
Dynovite for life.
Pick up 2 tubes of Doggosuds.
Get the 3rd tube free.
Peppermint, tea tree, lavender, Doggosud shampoo.
Made with all-natural coconut, jojoba, aloe. Great for healthy skin and soft, shiny coats.
But no itchy, harsh chemicals.
Lather up, rinse away.
Try Doggosuds. Buy 2, get 1 free.
At Dynovite.com.
DINOVITE.com.
Let's Talk Pets on PetLifeRadio.com.
Welcome back to Aquariumania on Pet Life Radio. My guests today are Alan Luken and Shelby Stensrud, Associate Brand Managers at Segrest Farms. Shelby and Alan, thanks again for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us on.
So I like to get personal at the beginning, just so our listeners get to know you both a little bit. Shelby, you're new to Aquariumania. Alan, you've been on before. Can each of you, starting with Shelby, explain briefly what led you to the aquarium hobby and then to Segrest?
I had no choice to be into this hobby because they had 4 tanks. Growing up, each Sunday we would actually read our books before there was Google and all that. And then we would actually go on and shop hop. So we'd research the animals, take a look at what we could find, come back, and it was always a Sunday conversation about what was happening in our aquarium. From there, I worked at Pruce Pets, which is a large family-owned store in Michigan, for about 14 years. And then this chance to be able to move to Florida to take this job at Segrest came up, and it's just something you don't turn down. So I'm very happy to take this leap and be here.
And Alan, how about you?
Yeah, so kind of like we talked before, I started just really when I was young. We would go on trips, family trips, and a lot of snorkeling. And then I started scuba diving, and that kind of got me hooked on wanting to do something with fish in my future. And I've always wanted to be a marine biologist. So I started when I was as young as possible. I've had fish tanks my family's had fish tanks. I didn't get mine until I was in 8th grade, which, believe me, that was a battle with my parents. But I got one finally, and then I started working at the local fish store called Montfort Pet, and from there went on to college, got my degree in marine science, and have bounced around between a couple of zoos and aquariums since before settling at Segrest, and happy as could be. This has been a roller coaster of a ride since coming on to Segrest. Both Shelby and I have kind of gone from starting at one position to various positions throughout our journey here, but have seemingly settled into something that's really enjoyable here.
Thanks to both of you for that intro. Now, there are definitely some listeners that aren't familiar with Segrest. Can either of you tell us a little bit more about Segrest Farms so our listeners know where you all are working and about the business itself?
We are one of the largest tropical fish wholesalers in the globe. So we have many different facilities. We have sister companies in Atlanta as well as up in Connecticut. We were founded in 1961 by Alan Segrest, and his passion began with raising angelfish in his basement. So this all started with 16 tanks and a couple of angelfish, and now we sell over 1 million fish a week.
And you all have done, and Segrest has done quite a bit for the industry. So let's dive in a little bit more. And actually, before we do that, I'm sorry, you're both associate brand managers. Can you each describe your specific job positions for us so we can kind of get a feel for where you are coming from and your focus?
Yeah, so we do have the exact same job title here at Segrest, but we have, very little overlap, I would say. We definitely are in marketing and, so naturally we're both at shows. We both try to be out there with Segrest. But from my perspective here, some of my biggest responsibilities are sustainability and conservation focuses. Of course, especially in recent years, that's a huge focus and something that Segrest is trying to put an increased onus on. So that's one of my biggest responsibilities here is focusing on, how can Segrest and how can the aquarium industry as a whole really be more conscious of their conservation efforts and sustainability, particularly when it comes to supply chain management.
And Shelby?
My position here as associate brand manager is social media. What our brand voice is going to be with social media and how we approach that is very important. That's the grassroots beginning to the hobby. That's kind of, what can we get out there that's going to bring hobbyists into this and grow it as a whole. The other vein I work on is a lot of the, retailer education, hobbyist education. What tools do we have to offer? We have a wealth of wisdom here at Segrest Farms to work with. Why not share our experiences and share our knowledge to build the aquarium industry?
That's great. You both definitely have separate but obviously overlapping roles, and we're going to dive a little bit more into everything you all do with regard to our main kind of topic area, sustainability, conservation, and of course, education. So let's start with, sustainability. I know in some of our discussions separately, we've talked about sustainability in the hobby, and there's a kind of a big discussion between wild caught and aquaculture and all that sort of thing. Can you maybe address the sustainability standards that Segrest has for suppliers?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's something that we do that we're really proud of. We hold our suppliers to specific standards in every aspect, but one of the major aspects is in sustainability. We fully support wild, sustainable collection of animals. We think it's an extremely good thing for the environment. So we need to make sure that the collectors and suppliers that we get animals from are following with our general guidelines and kind of practicing what we preach, so to speak. So we have all of our suppliers, they have to sign off every year on an updated version of what those standards are. So it's not a document that's been around for hundreds of years. It's something that's active, living, and we update on a yearly basis, and we talk to them about it. We don't just send it to them and say, sign this and send it back. We talk to them. We go through what exactly each point of this document means and why it's so important. I think that's something that's kind of lost in this discussion is the suppliers, the collectors, see all of the sustainability efforts as equally important. Their job relies on being sustainable. If they weren't, they would eventually be jobless. So they see it as equally important as we do. And I think that's something that bringing the entire industry together from a collector to an importer to the retailer to the home hobbyist is going to be a big thing over the next few years. And it's something here at Segrest that we're actively working towards.
So can you maybe give, are there any specifics with regard to some of those standards that, would be great for the listeners to hear about, any of the specific guidelines?
Yeah, sure. So some of the specific guidelines are things like making sure that every fish that is collected for Segrest is caught with a net. Obviously, cyanide fishing and other destructive ways of fishing are prevalent or were prevalent in specific regions of the world. And one of the things Segrest is 100% committed to is all net caught fishes. We won't accept any animal from anyone who is even remotely associated with cyanide, dynamite fishing, or destructive methods. So that's a big thing for us. And transport. So a lot of these fisheries are in third world countries. So a lot of these fisheries are coming from, may have substations throughout different areas that are hard to reach by, transportation. So they might spend time on a truck or a boat or on a plane. So transportation from where the animals are collected to the point where they're actually shipped to us is extremely important. And we make sure that there's an increased focus from our suppliers on how they're transporting animals, because just like we do here to retailers, it's extremely important to make sure that not only is the animal healthy, but that throughout its travel and throughout its time going from collection to being imported, that it's taken care of properly. So that falls a lot in how the animal is packed, how the animal is shipped, and how it's cared for.
So I guess there's maybe another small follow-up. So how do the collectors take this, and do you ever have collectors that maybe just have not been able to keep up, and then how do you handle all that?
There's certainly been collectors over the years that have not necessarily lived up to standards, and of course that happens. When that happens, we look for alternative sources, or we may already have alternative sources. I'm pretty proud to say, especially on the marine side, where there's an extreme focus on this for obvious reasons of being mostly wild collected animals, But on the marine side, we've got a really strong group of suppliers who actually work with us on some of these documents. So we know what we need to ask, but it helps to get their perspective, because it's easy to say, well, do this, but we need to understand where they're coming from too. So we get their input as much as we can and make sure that it jives basically with what we're trying to say. We're getting their input and working together with them generally makes this as easy as possible. And we very, very rarely will have suppliers come back to us and say, well, I can't do this or I can't do that. So it's been a great process for us so far.
So let's talk about another topic, which is obviously somewhat related, the Coral Conservation Initiative. I think when we spoke a little bit about this before and we had only touched upon it, this was a project or program that you had kind of helped initiate at Segrest. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the Coral Conservation Initiative is a project that was long in the works here at Segrest, and all of us kind of have tried to figure out how the aquarium industry can give back to the environment where it's needed. So what the Coral Conservation Initiative is all about is education, which I'll let Shelby talk about here in a sec, is education, conservation, and where exactly do corals come from when they enter the hobby. It's something that before I started at Segrest, I didn't really think about, and it's hard to not think, okay, well, I'm getting a piece of coral taken from a reef. Is that naturally destructive? Am I playing a part in what I absolutely don't want to be involved with? But in reality, that's not the case. And that's what the Coral Conservation Initiative is trying to shed light on, is that there's multiple ways of getting different corals, whether it's aquaculture, mariculture, or wild sustainable collection. And that in each manner, it's actually a benefit to the environment. Through aquaculture, we learn so much, and our husbandry skills have gotten so much better, which inherently helps the environment. Through mariculture, we've developed tactics that will actually help with these restoration efforts. There's actually been some restoration organizations founded by former or current coral mariculture suppliers, especially over in Indonesia. And then in wild sustainable collection, we learn so much about the environment. And that's what we kind of preach with the Coral Conservation Initiative, is that through wild sustainable collection, we can really see how these ecosystems work and how the aquarium industry can really benefit and help each individual reef and each individual environment.
So, Shelby, did you want to talk a little bit about the educational component of that?
What we're trying to tie this into for the hobbyists, I think there's a disconnect when you have wholesalers and retailers. As a hobbyist, you don't think that by keeping corals, you can actually be funding, this kind of conservation with the hobby. So that's what it's all about on the social media lines. And when we're trying to promote this is, as a hobbyist, just by keeping corals, that you are actually helping save the environment. So it's really kind of unique, a tie back that's not really well thought out until you present it. And then it really makes a lot of sense and resonates very well with the hobbyists. And hopefully through this, we're actually gaining new hobbyists into it and gaining interest in conservation as well.
That's great. So let's talk a little bit about the big picture, and we'll probably come back to it after the break. But there's definitely been some negative associated with the hobby in terms of sustainability and conservation. Maybe if you can, either of you can maybe touch on some of the positives that folks are really not aware of, and for maybe a minute or two, and then we'll come back to it after the break.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're spot on when you say that there's definitely negatives out there. And the negatives, just like any news, bad news is news, and that's what people want to read, want to listen to. But we need, as an aquarium industry, we need to do our part in promoting the good things, the sustainability that comes, the progress that has come thanks to maricultured corals, thanks to aquacultured fishes, thanks to all these different efforts. There's so many. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, but it's just something that really isn't talked about enough. And that's something that we'd like to do here at Segrest more is talk about the successes of the aquarium industry as it relates to conservation and sustainability.
So let's dive into that a little bit more after the break. Let's take a short break and we'll continue our discussions of sustainability, conservation, and education in the aquarium hobby with my guests Shelby Stensrud and Alan Luken from Segrest Farms after these messages.
Spanning the planet. You've landed at the pet entertainment center of the universe. Alert the paparazzi. This is Pet Life Radio, the ultimate animal adventure. Let's talk pets.
Let's talk pets
On Pet Life Radio.
Pet Life Radio.
PetLifeRadio.com.
We're back and continue our conversations with my guests Alan Luken and Shelby Stensrud from Segrest Farms. So, Alan, you started talking a little bit about some of the education and negativity that we're trying to combat, at least the aquarium hobby is, with regard to the trade and the hobby. Can you maybe give us a few more specifics?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest one is how fish are collected. We've all seen it in different magazines, different publications. We've seen the pictures of divers with masks over their face and bottles of this whitish, yellowish liquid, and they're going after fishes. And of course, that's cyanide. And that's always been prevalent. There's groups out there who specifically target that kind of stuff. And that's, for the longest time, the aquarium industry has kind of just said, oh, no, we don't do that. But that's about it. So what we're trying to do here at Segrest is say, oh, no, not only do we not do that, but here's what we actually do. So we partner with folks like in the Philippines. We sponsor a program in the Philippines where there's some folks over there that will actually train these divers. And these divers go all over the world, which is the best part about it. So it's not just a Philippine program. These divers are in Madagascar and Sri Lanka and Indonesia, Australia, all over the world, who are all trained by these expert net collecting divers in the Philippines. And that's something that's got to be celebrated by the aquarium industry and something that we certainly want to celebrate here at Segrest.
And with regard to, I guess, discussion between, mariculture and aquaculture and sustainable collection, it's interesting, but when you go to the message boards or even talk with people, there always seems to be sort of a one side versus the other. Can you maybe address your roles as well as the aquarium hobby and Segrest's thoughts on mariculture versus collection?
Yeah, so it's a big thing, and this is something both Shelby and I work on from different avenues, and she'll speak to the education, especially when it comes to a retailer. But, from a kind of back-end perspective, the biggest thing that we need to remember is that all of the folks who are doing aquaculture and all the folks who are doing mariculture and all the folks who are wild sustainably collecting animals are all positive for the industry. At no point would I say that, one particular segment is negative. It's all a positive. There's benefits to aquaculture, obviously. Kind of like we talked earlier, the husbandry increases that we've seen thanks to aquaculture is unbelievable. We've gone leaps and bounds because of all the information we've gained through tank raising so many different species. And through mariculture, being able to apply that directly to reef restoration is huge. And that should be something that the aquarium industry is talking about all the time. I just saw an article not that long ago where a reef restoration organization started using a microfragmenting is what they called it. Well, microfragmenting is simply fragging corals, which the aquarium industry has been doing for years and years and years. And we've been doing it in conjunction with restoration organizations, but when presented in a different way, it got blown up into this big thing. This guy had discovered some great new technique. Well, yeah, it's awesome, but the aquarium industry has been doing this for a long time. And we need to talk about it. We need to get this positive information out there. And with wild sustainable collection, it's so vitally crucial to continue getting new populations of species into the industry, regardless of how we do things, whether it's through aquaculture or mariculture. We need to continue to bring in new populations and a new variety. And that's where wild sustainable collection kind of stands alone. But again, there's 100% positives from wild sustainable collection as well. If you think about in these third world countries, there's not a ton of opportunities there like there are, say, in the United States, right? So let's say if you're a fisherman in a third world country, you've got a couple of different options on how to make a living. And you could talk, doing mining, doing slash and burn agriculture, doing different things that are actually destructive, whether directly or indirectly, to reefs, or you can be a sustainable aquarium fish collector where you literally make your livelihood by promoting and growing these reefs. So it's a benefit. It's something that, again, and I was guilty of this when I first started. I always thought wild collection was, that's not good. We're taking stuff from the reef. That's bad. But if you take a step back and look at the big picture, it's actually a net positive for the environment because these folks are so proud of the areas where they collect fish. It's quite incredible. They brag about every little aspect of their area, and it's limited areas. It's not like they have free reign to go anywhere they want. They've got areas where the government says you're legally allowed to collect fish here. That's where they collect their fish, and they make the most of it in every way possible. It's truly, truly incredible.
So let's talk a little bit about the freshwater side. Shelby, I know we've discussed Project Piaba and that Segrest has been involved with that. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that project and any of the related projects that are helping on the freshwater side?
Yeah, certainly. For those of you that are not familiar with it, it's a along the Rio Negro in the Amazon basin. So this actually covers 52,000 acres. And really, back to Alan's point, these people really don't have a whole lot of options. Out in Amazon, it's not very commercial. So you're talking about you have choices of either, the hack and slash burning or mining, those things that can really be detrimental to the environment, or to sustainably collect fish from their area. And again, harkening back to what Alan said, is they're protecting that, that's their livelihood. So they don't want to overfish it. They're actually teaching the other villagers how to take care of the fish that are within that little ecosystem. So it really is a massive benefit to the area as a whole. So we heavily support that. We've been involved for a little over 20 years. Sandy Moore, the president of Segrest Inc., has definitely been visiting down there. We have really worked very closely with them to kind of create these best practices so that the supply chain gets stronger overall. That's kind of the back end of it that retailers don't see, and really the hobbyists don't understand the complete, complexity of how important it is when you're looking at, different kind of fish. But if we're not sustainably wild collecting cardinals, as well as tank raising them, you're kind of missing the boat. You can't have one without the other and have a really, fantastic habitat for these animals to thrive in out in the wild, as well as in the aquarium hobby.
So I guess, and this is always kind of a tricky thing to show or to answer. Can either of you maybe point to any specific benchmarks or ways to kind of say, yeah, we are conserving, or the populations are stable, or that sort of thing? How do you address that question?
That's certainly a tough question, especially when you're talking about some of these third world countries and these areas that aren't regulated in the same manner that the United States is. I think the biggest thing we always focus on when we kind of discuss these issues is, well, how does the fishery look today compared to some time in the past? And 9 times out of 10, it's always better. Are there circumstances where, an area that was fished is not in good shape compared to how it was? Absolutely. Does that necessarily relate to the aquarium industry? Not necessarily. There's obviously all kinds of different things that impact the aquarium fisheries that aren't necessarily just the aquarium industry. I think that's a big thing that people kind of lose sight of when we talk about, the success, especially in wild collection, the success of these industries is these are fisheries that have been around for a long, long, long time. And again, if you think about sustainability, if they were truly not sustainable, these fisheries would have collapsed a long time ago. These fisheries wouldn't exist, but they do. And in many cases, and we can point to particular circumstances in Indonesia, and I'll use an example of there's a reef in, I believe it's East Bali called Candidasa. That reef, the pictures from early 2000s were not great. You picture a reef that has been rather decimated through climate change and through other anthropogenic effects. And now, thanks to the aquarium industry basically restoring those reefs, they've got giant man-made reefs there now. This particular region is booming. And I was fortunate enough to see it earlier this year when I was over there. And it was incredible. It's like a picture that you always dream about. And that's something that's directly related to the aquarium industry. It's a huge success story, and it's something that's ongoing. They did a great job, and now they're growing that one and they're applying it elsewhere. So those are the kind of success stories we always turn to.
So we talked a little bit about the supply chain side, and Shelby, can you maybe talk about how pet stores can get more involved and also be equally impactful and sort of your programs to foster that?
Yeah, and I would encourage customers to kind of, inquire about the supply chain. How are the animals being collected? Are you working with a company that is conscious of this? And I think it's a really big deal. We're focused on quality and conservation. We're not focused on price. We want the best animal out there to be able to get to the end consumer. That's what we're all about. So as far as the retailer goes, where are the animals coming from? How are they coming in is a really big part of that. And again, how can you convey that to your customers coming every footstep into your door? I know telling a story, and as a person who loved getting into the hobby, if I could get family excited about this sustainably wild collected fish or a Project Piaba fish, which now there's actually a kit available for Project Piaba fish through Central Garden and Pet. So we're really excited that launched this year because it tells a greater story and just something that the hobby is not used to seeing. So I think that's a huge part of it is just education. Educating your customers, being excited about it, and talking about all the types of supply chains the fish come from, because it adds to their sales, it adds to your revenue, and it keeps foot traffic coming through your door as far as being a loyal customer.
So with regard to the pet stores, obviously, Segrest works with a lot of them. Do you have specific kind of program materials for them, or how are you helping to kind of educate them on all of this?
Through our social media channels, that's a large place that we work out of. We also have a private retailer group that we run. where they're allowed to chime in, ask questions. That's a closed group, so you have to be invited, and we have to allow you to be a part of that. And that's really kind of a great place for those retailers to kind of, gain those sources. As we continue to build our educational program, we will have lots of things kind of coming out that they can click on, download, have the information right at their fingertips, as well as going to trade shows and chatting with us, because some of those talks at the trade shows, again, just harken back to the education and connecting the retailer to the hobbyist to the supplier.
Now, in terms of the aquarium trade and hobby, they're actually joint and complementary components. So we have the public aquaria and display aquaria, which also get fish from many times the same sources as the hobby itself. Can you both address how the industry as a whole, both the aquarium side, public aquaria side, as well as the pet side, how that's helping habitats worldwide?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that's a great point, and something that, again, kind of gets lost in translation is that the aquarium industry is not just home hobbyists and retailers. It also includes zoos and aquariums. I mean, they're a major portion of it. And one thing that they do outstandingly is education. And part of our coral conservation initiative that we discussed earlier is education through zoos and aquariums. So part of the program, we work with these zoos and aquariums, and we set them up with a tank of or a small system of these corals, and we give them these big, exhibit-like display signs, kind of like you'd expect to see talking about like a shark or a stingray. Well, it talks about coral in the hobby. And it's a really cool thing. And there's a couple, one is at Newport Aquarium in Newport, Kentucky, which also happens to be where I'm from. And then there's another one in Columbia, South Carolina at the Riverbank Zoo and Aquarium there, which is real close to where I went to school. So you can see a pattern here. But both of those have been set up and they're doing great. And we talk to them pretty consistently. But zoos and aquariums provide a vital piece to the aquarium industry in the sense of education. You go to a zoo or an aquarium to see animals, to learn, to gain more knowledge. And when they talk about the aquarium industry as a whole while they're there, it's invaluable to what we're trying to do here.
And so how about from a retailer perspective? Do you have anything to add, Shelby?
Yeah, certainly. I think there's a huge connection between the inspiration that zoos and aquariums can bring. I think how many times I stand in front of, an aquarium and like, man, I would like to have that. Have a slice of nature. You may not be able to put some of those large exhibit animals in your home, although we don't like to dream. You can still have that snapshot of nature. And sometimes I think it gets lost how inspirational those zoos and aquariums really, truly are, especially at such a young age. Getting kids into it, you don't forget seeing that big fish tank for the first time or something you've never even seen, outside of a book. So although it's not a direct relation to the retailer, it's a really great way to get inspiration, because when you go to your pet store, you have that thought in your mind, you have this grand scheme in your head, and the retailer is really the place where you can put your dream into place. So definitely there is a huge connection.
Personally, I have to agree, and I was inspired being from Chicago, trips to the Shed Aquarium, and that kind of inspired me to get my first tank, which was not very successful for me because I didn't want to listen to anybody at the time when I was 8. But I learned a lot, and definitely see the connection. Really appreciate the time you all shared with us today. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I'd like to thank, again, our guests, Alan Luken and Shelby Stensrud, and our producer, Mark Winter, for making this show possible. So, Alan and Shelby, do either of you have any final words of wisdom or information that you want to kind of close with? You can talk separately or together, however you want to do it.
I think the biggest thing for me and the take home that I hope so many people get from this is to think about what the aquarium industry is doing as a whole, and to think about all the good that comes out of the aquarium industry. And one of the things that I like to end a lot of these conversations with is ask questions. Ask questions about where your animals come from. Know that they came from a sustainably collected source. Know where the animals were collected, how they were transported, and where they were shipped to. It's invaluable information, and when done right, all that information is readily available.
And Shelby?
I think from a retailer perspective, this is a great way to bring your family in. This is not just a fish tank. This is now becoming a story. So now your family can really sit around and understand where these fish came from. You can talk all about the habitat and how it all connects from a much more global perspective, because that's the foundation we're laying for this next generation. And I think it's fundamentally beyond important. So, aquariums can really kind of build the future of this globe. And I think it's just not something we talk enough about.
Great. Thank you very much both for joining us. And please Be sure to follow Segrest Farms on social media and check out their episode page for more information on our 2 guests as well. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas for a show, email me at drroy@petliferadio.com. That's DRROY@petliferadio.com. Until next time, be sure to visit your local aquarium stores and keep your tanks clean and your animals healthy, and really learn more about the conservation and sustainability programs and how you can help educate your fellow hobbyists and retailers as well.
Let's Talk Pets, every week on demand, only on PetLifeRadio.com.